Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. The section that we are going to study today, Swamiji discusses two of the very important points that come in the study of Vedanta. The nature of the self and the experience of the self. So let's read page 12. Here I stand, and if I shut my eyes and try to conceive my existence, I, what is the idea before me? The idea of a body. Am I then nothing but a combination of material substances? The Vedas declare, no, I am a spirit living in a body. I am not the body. The body will die, but I shall not die. Here am I in this body, it'll fall, but I shall go on living. I had also a past. The soul was not created, for creation means a combination, which means a certain future dissolution. If then the soul was created, it must die. Just a few lines, but it encapsulates some of the very important principles in Vedanta. In general, we can say that when we think about a person, a knowledgeable person, the general tendency is to think that one who knows a lot about as many things as possible in the world. We say, this person is knowledgeable. While we know a lot about what is happening around us, what is around us, we may not know as much about ourselves. In fact, the idea that I need to know myself is not that much stressed in modern discourse. And that is because we generally assume, of course I know myself. What is there to know about myself? But there are a lot of things around me that I don't know. Vedanta takes a different tack. It says, unless and until I know myself, my knowledge of anything else will never be complete. Not only will my knowledge of other things be incomplete, very likely it will be distorted. Even in a very ordinary sense, we need self-knowledge. There are a lot of people who might discover and I have met some, and I'm sure many of you would have met some such people as well, who in much later in life discover that they had a flair for some subject or some talent, something that they were really good at. And sometimes people feel, oh, if only I had known when I was younger that I could do this well, it would have been so much better. I spent a large chunk of my life doing something in which I don't think I was very good at. But there is some other things which now I know I have interest in and I do well, but I didn't know it then, and I know it now. And that's can be sometimes frustrating, because time once lost doesn't come back. There are sometimes there are people who have come to the Vedanta Center who were formerly students at BU, and they have sometimes told me that as students they passed by the Bay State Road and looked at the Vedanta Society board, but somehow never felt like even going in. They didn't just even feel out of curiosity. They just kind of say, oh, there is some Vedanta thing here, but they never came in. And then 15, 20 years later, after they have graduated, they have been in workplace, and now they have developed interest in Vedanta, and then they come, and then they realize, well, as a student, I passed by this road so many times. And I love Vedanta, and if I had known it then, that I would have had an interest in this, it would have been so much better. I would have had more time to study it. And these are just a handful of examples like this. So we know from our own experience as well that the more we know of who we are as human beings, our strengths, our weaknesses, our interests, then we are able to make better informed choices and decisions in life. And so the importance of self-knowledge we kind of understand in a general way. Vedanta takes it to a higher level by saying that my knowledge of who I am is the most important thing. And therefore the question that gets often asked in Vedanta is not so much about who is God or where is God, but who am I? Sometimes it's possible to, and it's just a speculation, of course, none of us knows how religious ideas may have entered into the human mind. But it just seems natural to think that the first questions that may have come would be just by looking at the world. We are experiencing the world, and where did all this come from? And that seemed like a very natural kind of a question. Who made it, or what is the source of all this? Now, when did that inquiry, external inquiry into the origin of the world, turn back in asking about the origin of this me who is experiencing the world? And Swami Vivekananda speculates in a different time, in a different lecture. He once said that it's possible, again, it's just a speculation, it's possible that a different kind of question may have come by just our experience of dreams. Because in the dream, while we are dreaming, we are seeing an external world. Only after we wake up, we realize that that was not really external. But in the dream, the world that we experience is as external and as real as this world. And then when we wake up and say, oh no, the only reality in that whole thing was me asleep and me seeing all that. The dream world didn't exist. And that's possible then, that experience may have raised different kinds of questions in the mind. That this thing that I am experiencing, is it really out there? Or, like the dream I experienced last night, the reality might be different. Who am I now? Am I... Okay, I mean, think about it this way. When we wake up in the morning, we can ask the question actually every morning. The person I saw in my dream last night as myself. Because when we wake up next morning, sometimes when we remember the dreams and we narrate it to our friends, and we say, oh, in my last night, in my dream, I did this, I did that. So there was a person I saw in my dream, which I saw as myself. So when we wake up in the morning, we can ask that question. Who am I? Am I that person I saw in the dream last night doing this or that? Or am I that person who was asleep and who has woken up now? And that's a question not that easy to answer. We, of course, can say, well, I was not that person in the dream at all because I know I was lying in this bed. On the other hand, if I was not that person, how am I able to narrate the dream saying, I did this and I did that? So the I is a very fascinating entity. We cannot simply take it for granted. We cannot simply assume that, oh, I know who I am. And that is why Swamiji says, if I shut my eyes and say, I, what is it that comes before me? And inevitably, of course, our physical appearance is obviously going to come. When we stand before a mirror, we say, well, that's me, the one I see. Now, what I see inside the mirror is really not me. It's only a reflection. But even if it's a reflection of the body. So when I say that's me, none of us says I'm a body. I haven't heard anybody say I am this body. But we identify this body as me. And that's why I'm able to say now, I'm sitting here. Well, what is really sitting physically on this chair is this body. So I am kind of identified with this body. And then, of course, Swamiji says that we are not just the body. Well, there is the mind. And then, of course, he'll speak about the spirit. So the question about who I am is very important, because who I am is directly related to the kind of world I see. Sometimes we tend to think that the world is kind of some independent, objective entity, and I'm here. But not quite, because if you get a bunch of people and ask them, what do you think about the world? And although apparently we are all living in the same world, our impression of the world is going to be colored by our experience of the world. Some people are going to say, oh, this world is so wonderful, it's the Lord's creation. And some will say, this is a selfish world, it's a corrupt world. You say, how come that all of us live in the same world and have very different impression of it? Because all of what we experience in life is being filtered, is being colored by a lens of our own mind. And so none of us is as objective as we think we are. What we see is a colored world. And if we want to see the world as it is, then we have to remove all the distortions from our mechanism of perception. And that's the idea Swamiji will discuss later on. Let's continue. And here he's discussing now the theory of karma, which we have discussed many times on earlier occasion, but this is a very kind of a concise description of it. Some are born happy, enjoy perfect health with beautiful body, mental vigor, and all wants supplied. Others are born miserable, some are without hands or feet, others again are idiots and only drag on a wretched existence. Why, if they are all created, why does a just and merciful God create one happy and another unhappy? Why is he so partial? Nor would it mend matters in the least to hold that those who are miserable in this life will be happy in a future one. Why should a man be miserable even here in the reign of a just and merciful God? In the second place, the idea of a creator God does not explain the anomaly, but simply expresses the cruel fiat of an all-powerful being. There must have been causes then, before his birth, to make a man miserable or happy, and those were his past actions. Are not all the tendencies of the mind and the body accounted for by inherited aptitude? Here are two parallel lines of existence, one of the mind, the other of matter. If matter and its transformations answer for all that we have, there is no necessity for supposing the existence of a soul. But it cannot be proved that thought has been evolved out of matter, and if a philosophical monism is inevitable, spiritual monism is certainly logical and no less desirable than a materialistic monism. But neither of these is necessary here. Remember years ago when I was in high school, I had memorized this whole paper that we are reading now. And this sentence, philosophical monism, materialistic monism, and spiritual monism, it kind of sounded nice. It really didn't, as a teenager, it just didn't make too much sense. So let's reflect a little bit on this. So Swamiji discussing here that our need to know who we are. And in order to know who we are, we also must be able to figure out how and why we have these different experiences in life. It's possible to classify all of our experiences broadly as those which are joyful or pleasant, and those which are painful. And then there are some others which are neither joyful nor painful, just neutral, and they are not a problem of any kind. So it's essentially dealing with joy and dealing with sorrow. Most of us think that, well, joy is great. Well, who doesn't want to be happy? We kind of assume that we deserve it. Because, I mean, occasionally people do feel, what did I deserve to be so happy? Or when something good happens. But most of the time, we just assume, well, that's great. If we are religious, we say, well, this is God's grace that this wonderful thing has happened to me. Now, when things don't go well, when there is pain and suffering, that is the time most questions come. Like, why me? Why should this pain occur? And Swamiji discussed at least 2 points about the problem of answering that question and involving God into it. Because generally, religions tend to see God as an all-loving being and who is almighty for everything. God is all-powerful. And so then this question inevitably comes. If God is all-powerful, why should there be evil at all? Why should there be suffering at all? And it's not that everyone is suffering, because we see, at least as far as we can see superficially, some people seem to be doing just fine, or in any case, suffering less than some other people. And then we say, why should God, who loves us all equally, allow more pain in others, less pain in some others, and just there's great happiness in some others? And clearly, there's not just one answer to it. Many have tried to answer it in different ways. Some have said, God just loves some people more than others. Some are God's favorites. Those are the people God has chosen, and of course, things will be well. Again, it's not always worked out that way, in the sense that there is a saying attributed to one of the rabbis, who, because sometimes it is said the Jewish people are the one chosen by the Lord. And we know historically how much they have suffered. So apparently, one rabbi once is reported to have said, "Oh Lord, for some time, better try choosing somebody else for a change." And so being chosen people of the Lord may not necessarily imply that everything is going to be just fine for us, at least in a way that human beings can understand. And so this question about the presence of evil and suffering has always seemed like an intractable problem in spiritual life. And so what Swamiji is here now trying to emphasize is that instead of involving God into it, can we just take the focus on the self, that take the responsibility ourselves for whatever is happening in our life, good or bad, and keep that God's presence as an all-loving being unaffected by this. Otherwise, we are going to land into contradictions. Now, there are some people who don't believe in God, don't believe in anything. They would say that everything is just inherited. And that's where that paragraph about the monism comes in. That all the tendencies of the mind that we have are inherited from our parents. And Swamiji then says that there are these two parallel lines, and there is no proof that thought has evolved out of matter. Again, with a materialistic explanation of the world, just simply says, consciousness appeared suddenly, and then emotions, and everything gets then reduced to just these chemical reactions in the brain. And what Swamiji is saying here about, even though the word soul is used here, the soul is used not in the sense of spirit, right? It's come closer to what we might say the mind. And so materialistic monism would mean nothing but this gross matter that we see. That's all that exists. This is the only reality, is this matter. But philosophical monism, my feeling is that Swamiji is referring to this oneness of the mind, of these ideas, that somehow, if at all we have to think about things being inherited, then we have to accept that there's some kind of a one whole large cosmic mind which connects us all. And then, of course, spiritual monism is that one spirit. So there are these three different ways we can take a look at it. And Swamiji doesn't explain it in detail, but he just presents this idea that it's possible to look upon oneness or monism at least at these three broad levels of material level, the level of the mind, which might explain the passing of tendencies from one life to the next, and then the spiritual monism. Let's read the next paragraph. We cannot deny that bodies acquire certain tendencies from heredity, but those tendencies only mean the physical configuration through which a peculiar mind alone can act in a peculiar way. There are other tendencies peculiar to a soul caused by his past actions. And a soul with a certain tendency would, by the laws of affinity, take birth in a body which is the fittest instrument for the display of that tendency. This is in accord with science, for science wants to explain everything by habit, and habit is got through repetitions. So repetitions are necessary to explain the natural habits of a newborn soul. And since they were not obtained in this present life, they must have come down from past lives. So here is a question that we might like to dwell on, that whatever tendencies of mind I have, are all of those tendencies inherited because I was born in a certain family and grew up in a certain environment, or I had those tendencies already in me, and by some kind of an inscrutable law of nature, I took birth in that family which would provide the right environment for those tendencies to flourish. And so that's essentially the question about whether the tendencies are inherited from our parents, or we choose. Of course, we choose in a sense, nobody really none of us remembers we were really asked before, like, which family would you like to be born in? We just found ourselves in a certain situation. But the law, not the law, the theory of karma is that since nature seems to follow the path of least resistance, when a soul takes birth, it will find an environment, the set of parents and the family or wherever, which would make it easy for that soul to express its tendencies and to experience its karma in that environment. That's the only way you could say that a certain kind of a choice is involved, and that choice gets expressed through our past tendencies and actions. So these are a few of the ideas that we have seen today. So I would now like to welcome your thoughts and comments or questions on this, but the idea of the self and the idea of karma. Topics we have discussed many times before, but it will be good to refresh our memories, and if you have any fresh thoughts on this subject.
So, Swamiji, it seems a lot of the material world is trying to pursue this elixir of immortality, yet in spirituality is providing us just this. How come it's still so difficult for us to... Why are the droves not coming to spirituality? How come it's so difficult for us to think of this kind of immortality that's being preached here as being even higher than the immortality which we think could be present through medicine and science?
Yeah, that's a good question. I imagine that it just as Swamiji says, is just repetitive actions for life after life after life, and even in this life itself, all of our understanding and our perceptions are based on the idea that that which I see, that which I encounter, that is reality. And so we take a lot for granted, and all of our lives can be led just taking for granted what we have been told or what we have seen from our childhood, everyone taking for granted. And any kind of breakthroughs that occur in any field is usually from people who refuse to take things for granted. And that's what sometimes we just say, thinking outside the box. Because if all of us continue thinking in the same way, assuming the kind of things that everyone assumes, then there is just there's not going to be any breakthrough itself. And that's why, one of the things that I can mention about almost a universal assumption is that things exist, and things exist independently of me. There is no proof for this, but this is just universally assumed. In fact, the entire material science is based on this simple assumption that here is an object, here is an object, this is an object, this is an object, and, well, as far as we can see, this particular object has the ability, because it has consciousness, it has an ability to see, feel, touch, and try to understand this. This one doesn't seem to have consciousness, so this probably is not able to see me. But this will continue, this has an existence. Even if I'm not aware of it, this still exists. This is just plain assumption. There is no proof for it. And that's why one of the things they often ask is, if a tree falls in a forest and no one has seen the tree fall, has the tree fallen? And we have to say, from a present understanding, well, so what? Even if nobody has seen it, the tree has still fallen. And then we might say, well, what's the proof? How do you know it has fallen? Because science wants an evidence for everything. And it's good to know that the entire edifice of materialist sciences, while the procedure itself is great and it's wonderful and it has done great things, but it is based on certain assumptions which are unproved. You have to kind of take those for granted and then go forward. That's the idea. Johnny?
Swamiji, as a comment of what you just said, in science there is this thing called the indetermination principle, for which as long as you do not observe a particle, that particle can assume any, let's say, form, value, and it's just the act of observing that like collapse the wave function and freeze the particle in a state that then you can measure. But the measuring the nature in some way, the nature of the particle, that would be sort of totipotent, if you want. So it's like, it is true that we don't know if something exists if we do not observe it.
Right, but for instance now, what would science say? Many of you know much more science than I do, so what do you think? What would be a general approach to this? Does the world exist when I'm not aware of it? So what would be? I mean, normally we would say, when I wake up in the morning and I find myself in my bed, I would say, well, this is the bed I slept in last night, right? I was not aware of it, but this is the same bed. Now, there is really no proof that it's the same bed, other than the fact, well, I remember it. That's my memory. Just last night, I remember I came and slept here. And so, isn't that a proof enough that it is the same bed I slept in last night and I woke up the next morning? And what Vedanta would say is, no, that's not a proof enough. Because even in my sleep, I can wake up in the morning and say, this is the same bed I slept in. Because in the sleep also, I will go through these three states. So there will be waking in my sleep, there will be dream in my sleep, and there will be deep sleep in my sleep. And so I will continue to think that the bed I slept in my dream has an existence apart from me, although we know that next morning when I wake up and I go and again I dream the next night, it will be a different bed. And I will not feel that that is a different bed. I will feel it's the same bed I have been sleeping in every night. Just like when we dream at night, we don't see it as a new dream. We don't see it as a fresh dream. So when I let's say I start dreaming and it's already night and I go to sleep. And the bed I sleep in my dream, I would say, this is the bed I've been sleeping in every night. Although that's the first time I'm seeing it, because it's a new dream. And so there is really no proof that just as every night I can have a new dream and yet feel it to be the same old world in the dream, every morning when I wake up, this might appear to be the same old world like yesterday, but it may not be. So this could be, our waking could be beginning of a different dream. Just like sleeping we see a different dream, waking we see a different dream. Yes.
So Swamiji, in my dream, this waking me is not the witness. Someone else is the witness of my dreaming world.
No, you are the witness. What do you mean, someone else?
But the waking henna is not the witness. I'm not. When I wake up, I remember, but I'm not the witness.
No, well, if you are not the witness, then you will not say, how will you remember if you were not the witness? The fact that you remember means you were the one who saw that dream.
So if I am the witness of my dreaming world, so dreaming me is the witness of my waking. So dreaming me is the witness of my waking, so-called waking world.
No, it's not clear.
So who is the witness of this world and the dreaming world? Who I am creating. As I'm creating my dreaming world, I am creating this world.
Absolutely.
So it's my question is that it's not who am I? Who is the whoever I cannot say is a person who is a witness of both the world.
In Vivek Chudamani, Shankaracharya describes it. This is a good question. Shankaracharya says, what is the cause of the dream? And a cause of the dream is my ignorance of my waking identity. Because now I know who I am, and in order for me to dream, I have to sleep. And sleep really means I have temporarily, at least, forgotten my waking identity. I become ignorant of my waking identity, which is what sleep. Unless and until I become ignorant of my waking identity, I will not fall asleep. So the sleep really means forgetting myself. And only then dream become possible. Waking really means getting back my waking identity. So there is I don't know what's the English word in logic they use for it. In Sanskrit, they call it Anvaya Vyatireka. Anvaya Vyatireka means, how can I know something is the cause and nothing else? And the idea is, if A is present, this event occurs. Whenever A is absent, the event doesn't occur. And then you know that the A is the cause of that event. So when it's presence, it happens. In the absence, it doesn't happen. And so dream occurs when my waking identity is forgotten. Dream ends when I get back my waking identity. And then your question was, what about this waking world? And the answer is, my identity as the Atman or Brahman, when I forget my identity as the spirit, the waking world appears. And this will continue, will not end until I regain my spirit identity. So just as forgetting the waking identity creates the dream at night, forgetting my spirit identity has created this waking world. And so this is as much a dream, but this dream seems to be lasting longer than the dream I had last night. Anish?
So Swamiji, this question about like the tree, if you don't see the tree and did it fall? Did you actually know whether it falls? But it seems like you can't prove anything. If we take this logic to its extreme, then you can only prove that you exist. There's nothing else that you can prove. Even if I were to see the tree falling, I could say, how do I know the tree actually fell, even though I actually see it? It seems like, if you take the argument to its extreme, then, if I see the tree, who knows? It could be a hallucination. There's no proof that it actually happened. It could be a video or something. It could be a dream. And so the only thing that we know is that we exist. There's nothing else that we know.
Right. But at least if you have seen, there is something out there you will know. So consciousness is a prerequisite for knowledge. To have a knowledge of a tree, you must become conscious of a tree, even if it's not an absolute reality. I mean, to be able to see the dream, I have to become conscious of the dream. The dream doesn't have to be absolutely real. But I know that there was a dream. It may not be real, but I know it because I was conscious of it. So if there is a tree that has fallen in a forest which nobody has seen and nobody was ever conscious of, how do you know it happened? That's the idea. So in order to be conscious of something is not to grant it absolute reality, but even if it's a provisional reality, consciousness is needed for that. Yeah. Akash. Yeah.
So I was reflecting a little bit about the consciousness, defined in different ways, and there's the inner consciousness, which is the ultimate truth, as per our spiritual seeking, endeavors. But then, how do you know that the inner consciousness, if one was to be a devil's advocate, for lack of a better word, how do you know that that is real relative to anything else? So, how would you make that the absolute reality versus relative reality?
Yes, so that's a good question. In fact, in logic, they say, what is that? Again, it's a Latin term. It's like it can infinite regression, it can just go back. Who is perceiving this? That's why they speak about the God as the first cause. Because you say, well, everything came from God. We say, well, then from where did God come from? How do we know God was always there? Then we say, well, whoever came from, and then you can go back infinitely. And all that this means is that whatever is that ultimate, that is that consciousness. So if this consciousness, if you ask, where did this consciousness come from, or who was observing, who was conscious of this consciousness, then if this consciousness, external consciousness, as you said, is an object, then it's not really consciousness. Because the way in Vedanta the word consciousness is used, consciousness is by definition always self-consciousness. Sometimes we look upon consciousness as something that evolves in the course of evolution. Then we tend to look upon consciousness as some kind of an objective thing, as some whatever abstract, or some kind of something floating around. But consciousness is always self-consciousness. Because even in now, all of us who are sitting here, it's only my consciousness that I am directly aware of. I have no doubt about my consciousness because I'm conscious of all of you. Now, I can say that everyone sitting here are conscious beings, but your consciousness is only an inference for me. I don't have any direct evidence that you are a conscious being. I'm just assuming that we are all human beings. I'm a human being. I'm conscious. Therefore, you must be conscious. So the only consciousness I can be absolutely sure of is my own consciousness. All the others are just this. And therefore, consciousness is always self-consciousness. Yeah.
I guess the related question would be for, for science, for those of us that aspire to make discoveries and advance the field.
Yeah.
It's all based on, measurement of something.
Right.
And I think to your point about the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that if you measure something, you've altered its state. And at best, you can make associations between, if something is there, it means there's a causation. If it's not there,
right.
And we do those types of. But how much of that, explains perhaps why certain things fail, why certain, therapies may not work, because it's at best an approximation of reality.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah,
so
it has to be measurable. That we kind of have a certain parameters in which to fit something, and then it seems to work within that. But if we can't fit into it, if it can't be measured, it can't be weighed, or if we don't have instruments to somehow grasp it, then science is helpless with that. And Swami Vivekananda points out, therefore, that the mind as an instrument, when external instruments fail, we need to recognize that we are not completely helpless. That both, the body as an instrument we kind of understand a little bit, because clearly with the help of the body we are able to do a bunch of things. So yes, but the mind is an instrument also. And just as with the new things that are found in new gadgets that are coming in technology, we have more sophisticated instruments coming out every year as our knowledge increases. But similarly, it's possible to make our mind also more sophisticated, and kind of an upgrading of the mind. A new upgrade for the mind is possible. And then we could say, just like let's say an iPhone or any mobile phone, it's possible to still use phones which are 5 years old or 6 years old, and they will do some basic things, but a latest phone will do a lot more and better than an old phone. So similarly, the mind that we all have, it's like the basic phone, and it can do a lot of things. But if I can now upgrade my mind, not by throwing away the mind, but just kind of improving it, then the same mind will be able to do a lot more. And we could say a yogi's mind, or a person who is enlightened, that person has refined their inner instrument to such a level that through that instrument, they have a much clearer picture of what's around us than with our old, unupgraded minds. That's one way to look at it. Yes, Aruna? Yeah, that's okay, yeah.
So this is just a curious question, Swamiji. So people who are enlightened and they are aware of this life, what happens to their dream?
What happened to their?
To their dreams.
Well, by enlightened mean they have woken up.
Yeah.
The word Buddha
Yeah.
means one who is awake.
Yeah.
And when we are awake, all dreams end. So no more dreams. So if you are enjoying the dream, don't be in a hurry to wake up. Irina?
I'm just thinking from my point of view, because I'm not a strict follower of Vedanta. I'm just somehow middle way. I think, for example, my bed. I'm sleeping in my bed. For example, comparing to me yesterday, today I had some insight. So my perception of the world is different than, for example, it was last night. Today in the morning I have different perception of the world. So definitely then I see world is different. Everything is changing, so it's not the same. Then I think, what happened to this bed? If this bed has, I'm just speculating, consciousness definitely of itself somehow. So my contact with this bed, when I had some insight, for example, my consciousness expanded. So how it affects this bed? So I hope, maybe it's to the best, to the positive. I don't know, but it's anyway, bed also changing somehow, right, in itself. That's my understanding. Mm-hmm. So the next thing, I think, for a person who perceives this world as alive, so it's middle way. For example, like Divine Mother, I speculating, or Ishvara, who is just in whom all the things, all living beings are reflected, and who can hear even just like fall of a leaf or just steps of an ant. So for him or for her, life of a tree, if something happened to a tree, it's reflected in this consciousness. So it's like the cosmic consciousness. So I just feel happy that it's somehow suffering of this tree is reflected in this Ishvara or Divine Mother. So this is my answer for myself. It's reflected there because it's living being. but I cannot know about it.
No, I think everyone must. That's good. Thank you for sharing that, because I think every one of us must have the freedom to try to understand the world around us and our place in it in our own way, and to make it as meaningful as it can be. And there is no reason why the meaning should come to everyone in the same way. So there are infinite possibilities. That's true. Broadly, we could say also that there are these two schools of thought, and there is no meeting point between them. And we have to just figure out which way of thinking would make sense. Because there's one way of thinking, well, let me just explain what it is. So one way is this object. I see this object because it is here. I see it because it is there. And I think probably pretty much all of us would agree with that. Why do I see this? Because it is there. I have good eyes, the object is here and I see it. That's one way. So I see because things are there. The other school of thought is things are there because I see them. And that's the kind of a paradigm shift that I'm seeking about. I'm not saying either this is right or that is right, but all of our thinking has to be consistent with this basic idea that my understanding of the world and things in it can either be because all this is the world around me and it is there, therefore I'm seeing it. And a completely different way is, why is the world there? Because I'm seeing it. Why is the dream world there? Because I'm seeing it. When I wake up in the morning, I'm no longer seeing it, the dream world has gone. So these are the two they are in Sanskrit, they are called Srishti Drishti Vada or Drishti Srishti Vada. Simply put, I see things because they are there, or the things are there because I see it. Anyway, so we won't go too much into this, but just keep that in mind. When Vedanta emphasizes that we need to look at everything from a subjective standpoint, it is really putting the perceiver as the only reality, and everything is just as dream is. Dream doesn't have any objective reality. The perceiver alone is true. And the other way, of course, is that, well, here is all this world, and we are one among the billions of people in this world. They are experiencing it. I'm experiencing it. I'm trying to figure it out. Everyone else is trying to figure it out. And that's another way of looking at it. So these are two major schools of thought, major way of understanding the world. So we'll stop here today, but I would encourage you to give some thought to this about how, in what way our thinking might change if we accorded greater reality to the perceiver than to the perceived, greater reality to the subject who is perceiving it than the object that is being perceived. And all of our present day ideas of knowledge and understanding are based on primarily understanding the objects of our perception, not so much the subject who is perceiving them. So let's stop here, but hold this thought in your mind, and next week we will reflect a bit more on it. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. on Sunday, for satsang, our subject will be look at the ocean. But before we look at the ocean, I think it's daylight savings, right? So, well, we'll get to sleep 1 hour extra. So remember, nowadays, earlier we had to say, remember to adjust your clocks. Nowadays, most of us have digital and they just kind of adjust by themselves. But in case if you still have a manually operated clocks or wristwatches, make sure you change them so that you don't come, well, you might come 1 hour in earlier, right? Or 1 hour late. How does it work? If you fall back, no, you might come 1 hour late for the service if you don't change this thing, right? What will happen?
Spring, you make the time go forward, and fall, bring it back.
So people might come earlier rather than miss that lecture. Okay. See, it's so confusing. Vedanta is much simpler than this. So a subject will be look at the ocean. It's a quote from Swami Vivekananda, which actually deals with the 3 monisms that we briefly touched upon today. And so we'll discuss it more on Sunday. Next Wednesday, we'll continue this study. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our meditation will also continue as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.